So this is the white iPhone 16e. It just launched a couple days ago actually, and we're already going to speed test it against the top of the line. We're going straight to the top of the line, the iPhone 16 Pro Max. So let's see how good the base 16 and the 16 series stacks up next to the highest end version, the 16 Pro Max. So what is up, guys? Nick here, helping you to master your technology. Let's go ahead and just quickly begin with a boot up test in 3, 2, go, and see which one can get there first. Now, Apple is billing this as a 16 model, so we're going to compare it to the best 16 model, one that has been a very great performer for me since it launched, the iPhone 16 Pro Max. And you're going to get this 16e for $599, or you're going to get the iPhone 16 Pro Max for right around, $12.99-ish. Now, the iPhone 16e did turn on faster. Granted, I do have more apps on the iPhone 16 Pro Max, so that could be why. But I'm going to give it the win there. You could see they went with the older notch. So this phone from the front really feels like an iPhone 13 or a 14. And then they have the dynamic island over here, which is what the regular 16 has. So that is one con of going to this phone. If you want the dynamic island, you don't get it on the 16e, but the 16e does turn on faster. And we're looking at Face ID because it still has that sensor in there. This is definitely going to be just like any other Face ID iPhone. A lot of people are really knocking this phone, but if you consider what the iPhone 10 cost, when it came out $1,000, this phone is way better than an iPhone 10 and it's $599. However, tech reviewers, a lot of them out there are knocking this phone because they're comparing it to what they're used to using, which is all the top end flagship smartphones. And if you use these, even me myself, I can definitely say this phone feels horrible by comparison to a top of the line device. But for those of you who don't need or use these over the top devices, then you're probably still going to like that phone over there. But in terms of Face ID, besides the visual aesthetic and the dynamic island, there is no real difference between using either. And generally scrolling through the software, I really don't notice a massive difference. Even though this is 60 hertz, going through the main home screens, there's virtually no difference. I'm kind of shocked how smooth the iPhone 16e is considering it only has 60 hertz. I don't remember the regular 16 feeling that good, but I'll have to go ahead and test those two together, even though they have the same chip. Now, scrolling through app library, this also looks about the same. And strikingly, I've been noticing besides the older look on the front, the iPhone 16 actually kind of feels like a 16. It has like the Apple Intelligence over here. It's got the A18 speed. It's got a decent camera, while not even close to regular 16 models. It's still a decent camera. It does feel like a watered down 16. It really does. So if you're looking for that, you're looking for a entry level version, I think this is a decent option, especially if you do a trade-in and you can get a little bit less price. But generally going through iOS, there's virtually zero difference in performance, which is a good thing for you if you're looking for this phone and you want really good performance and you have like an older iPhone. All right, guys, so here we are at the app test. You can see everything is closed out for both products. Let's go ahead and begin with calendar. And you can see no real issues for either. I did have dark mode on, so I'm going to turn that off really quickly before we keep going. Let's go into clock and, of course, basic apps. I did notice right there that the promotion did look smoother when launching in, but it's not too much different. Let's go into calculator. And you can see it looked like the 16 Pro Max. We'll go to weather and virtually the same. Now, keep in mind the 16e does have the A18. The iPhone 16 Pro Max has the A18 Pro and also has a 6-core GPU. This has a 4-core GPU. Let's go into Google News. And you'll see that was first on the left. We're going to go over here into technology. I didn't click that at the same time, so we'll just go ahead and click a new article. Let's go ahead and click this new Motorola article here. You'll see loaded a little faster there on the iPhone 16 Pro Max, but nothing massive to speak of. Let's go ahead and swipe up out of there. We'll go into App Store on both, and you'll see pretty close there. Let's go ahead and hit games. And looks like the iPhone 16e on the left. I can definitely see it here. It looks a little choppier with the 60 hertz scrolling through there. But when you're not comparing them side by side, I really don't see it too much. That's not to give them an excuse. Like, bro, they need to put 120, 90 on all the future iPhones. It just can't stay this way forever. So I think eventually we'll see it across the lineup. But, you know, for this phone, I don't know if people are really going to care on this phone, because the target buyer of this device right here, the 16E, probably isn't looking to have, you know, the top of the line. Let's go into Instagram. And that's why people are a little upset, is because the price is kind of high for not having a little bit more spec. It's probably like $100 overpriced, if we're being real. Even for somebody who's not into tech, it's still slightly overpriced. Let's go over here and scroll down. And I also, all right, so let's go ahead and head up into Amazon. And I would suspect if you were to want to upgrade your iPhone 16e in the future, it's not going to give you great resale value, like versus like a Pro or a Pro Max. So if you were looking for like a trade-in, like I'm gonna get this phone for a couple of years, probably not the best option, because you're not going to get too much back on it when you do go to sell it. Although it should still do better than, say, the, you know, some Android phones out there for sure, because the Apple phones just sell better when you resell them, but it's not going to be giving you a ton back down the line. I would say this phone will probably be worth $200-300 after about a year or so. Let's go over here to Groupon and you'll see what happens. We'll go over here, continue. Let's go over here to categories and let's go ahead and check out. That was a different one. Let's check out oil change. Have you changed your oil lately? We're going in the spring. It's time for a spring maintenance. Let's go ahead and swipe through. We'll go into Gemini and we'll see what happens there. Let's go into Subway Surfers and you'll see, this is where I want to see how much different. And the 16E loading faster there on Subway Surfers. I'm really wondering if all like the data on my 16 Pro Max, and I have been loading up my 16E with a bunch of stuff right now too, but I'm wondering, just because I've had it a while, if it's like it's not loading stuff as fast. Let's go into Jetpack Joyride. I'm gonna see some people saying already, stop giving it excuses, you just don't want the 16E to win. No, I just wouldn't expect it to, and it actually loaded Jetpack Joyride faster. I just wouldn't expect it to over the A18 Pro. Let's head up out of here. And 8-ball pool. I think this video is already showing us that you're getting the same performance in the real world day to day. Just opening apps, using the devices, you're getting essentially the same performance. Let's go into Dead Trigger 2. And that's a really good thing for those of you who don't want to pay for this phone. And that also loaded first on the 16E. You don't want to pay for a Pro or Pro Max. I really do think, though, that the Pro series, like if you're not using the cameras, like what's the point? What's the point of going to the Pro? There's no point. Like, you have to be using those like additional ultra wides, zooms, and I definitely use them. But like I'm saying, like you got to make good use of them, or it's kind of pointless. You're just like throwing money away, because I think what really increases the cost of the Pro series is the cameras. It's like buying a digital camera that you don't have to go get separate lenses and things like this, and you know, attachments and stuff, and like that's one of the real reasons to get one of the top tier phones. Let's go into real racing on both phones and we'll see what happens here. Now, when it comes to the 4-core GPU on the 16E, you're probably just looking at a little bit of a decrease when it comes to the frame rates, like holding the frame rates. But load times are probably not going to be substantially different. You see, it actually loaded this game up a little first on the left. Let's go into Free Fire. It's really going to probably improve on the 16 Pro Max when you're doing extended gaming sessions. Also, you're obviously going to want a Max phone. If you're taking this area serious, it's going to be a much better experience, larger display, longer battery life. While this is pretty darn good battery life on the 16E, one of the best selling points of it, it's still not going to beat the Max. Like, the Max is the Max for a reason. Let's swipe up out of there. So Free Fire did load up first on the 16E. For some reason, the 16E, I really think it's because I have more apps on the iPhone 16 Pro Max, but the 16E has been winning this out here against the 16 Pro Max. So, well, I tapped that kind of late, but you still see it earlier on, it did load a little bit slower. I actually want to run that one back just to make sure of that, because while I'm not trying to give the 16E excuses, I want to make sure that they're kind of like loading more evenly, because I think this one was maybe doing an update. So you can see now the 16 Pro Max was ahead. Yeah, so it was probably the 16 Pro Max doing a update. Let's go into Call of Duty now. 3, 2, go. And if you see some jump cuts during my speed tests, it's because sometimes the apps were not loading properly. So I make sure that they're both like up to date, and then I come back. So if you're wondering like why was there a cut right there in the middle of the speed test, that's right. I was just making sure that the app was being fair. And you've seen that they both did load up the Call of Duty at about the same time. Let's go over here into 3D Mark, and you'll see pretty similar. Let's go into Geekbench 6. Faster on the right. Of course, 16E just came out, so couldn't expect too much different. You could see the memory says 7.54. Over here, it says 7.45. Clock speed 4.03 gigahertz. Clock speed 4.04. So, you know, the 16E, bro, for being $599 is giving you nearly $1,000 phone chipset, which is nice. But I do have to say that the 16 Pro Max overall is still the way more high-tech phone. If we want to talk about technical specifications, cameras, it's the best they've done yet. So the 16E is not really competitive here in terms of a full comparison, but in terms of speed, if you were looking for 16 level performance from the 16E, I think you've seen in general day-to-day, you're definitely getting that here for sure. This kept up and beat the 16 Pro Max in multiple areas so far. So that's kind of strange. It's mostly probably because my phone has more data stored on it. We'll see how this performs in a few months. I'll do some new speed tests with some new phones, but it's doing great. It really is. And I'm pretty impressed with the performance on the 16E. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and take a look at the RAM management now. One of the great upgrades to this phone is 8 gigabytes of RAM. If you're coming from an older 12, 13, you finally have more RAM in your pocket. You were having 4 gigs before. You're going over here to 8 if you're coming from one of those older phones. That is a substantial upgrade, especially for longevity. I mean, laptops have an 8 gig of RAM for a long time. With phones being a lighter operating systems, 8 gig of RAM is really a good spot to be in for a long-term phone usage. And you've seen no real issues. And if you noticed, even though this is 60 hertz, you've seen that the animations didn't look terrible here on the relaunch. Again, I'm not saying they shouldn't bring ProMotion. They should. I'm just saying that it wasn't horrible. iOS is a pretty smooth operating system with good animations, and Apple slows them down anyway, so you can kind of really see it's not a massive deal. General consumer is definitely not going to notice. Let's go ahead and take a look at the 16 Pro Max. All right, so looking at the 16 Pro Max, I definitely can see it though. It is smoother, especially side by side. Let's go over here. It doesn't like feel like it's any faster. It just looks visually more pleasing. So you got to decide how important is that to you. You'll have to go to a Pro or a Pro Max to get that. You can also go to an older iPhone Pro to still get this, and probably still maybe be able to find it for cheaper than the 16E. But Apple has put Apple Intelligence, they've put the latest processor. So again, you're going to feel like you are making sacrifices again if you go with an older iPhone, especially in the area of AI. So that's where the 16E is still kind of enticing, even though you're making sacrifices on the hardware. So it depends on how interested you are in the AI and how much you're willing to spend for it. So you've seen the 16 Pro Max had no issues here in the reloads and also looked visually more pleasing. So here are the final scores, and you could see that the overclocked or higher CPU speed A18 Pro definitely came out on top here. In the single core, we do have the 3322 and 8347, but if you look closely, look at the 16E. Now, one of the things you could say is, oh, well, it doesn't have multiple cameras, it's a boring phone, it's lame, every other phone has more, but a lot of phones at those prices don't have these kind of benchmarks, okay? So keep in mind, you are paying for a top tier chip in the iPhone 16E. Yeah, you can find some phones that are, a little bit less as well, and probably have really good chips as well, but we're talking A18 here, so yes, there is some competitors with great chips at that price, but that's one of the best, I would say, out there at that price. So again, it doesn't mean it's a worthy phone for you. It does have an old design, but you can't knock the chip. There's nothing really wrong with the chip. The chip is good. Let's go ahead and check the 3D Mark, and I was not surprised that the 16E lost against the 16 Pro Max in that test, but I would expect a bigger gain here from 3D Mark where we're testing graphics here. So I would expect a bigger gain here on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Stay tuned, I'll be back in a second. And that's exactly what occurred. That's what I expected. A substantial improvement here to the 16 Pro Max in the graphic department. We're talking about 8 FPS higher here. Well, actually more like 9 and 4360 versus 2944. So this score is better than 87% of the market. However, there are phones that are now faster than that. This score is better than 60% of the market. So this is substantially better for gaming, like no doubt about it. If you want better graphics, better performance, 16 Pro and Pro Max are the top tier iPhones out there. This will do good. It will beat a lot of old iPhones, but it will not be amazing in this department. And also, I was already testing gaming. The 16E suffers from the same issue I had with some older iPhones, heat. It gets really warm, especially up in this area. I'm not going to flip the phone right now, but up in this area, the backside, it gets really toasty under gaming load. So not my favorite for that area. All right, guys, so let's wrap things up with a quick camera launch, as I always do on my speed tests, and we'll see which one does that better. I think it was the 16 Pro Max. Shutter speeds are one of the best things about iPhones. They have really fast shutters. So you can like pull this out. You're not really going to miss too many moments. Let's go ahead and do this again. 3, 2, go. And you see not a massive difference. If we go to zooming, you'll be able to zoom in 10 times. Over here, 25 times. So it's definitely much better. And you no longer have ultra wide for the iPhone 16e, which is a weird omission. I feel like they could have had that on there, even if it was not as great. But again, they're always trying to find ways to upsell to the next phone. And honestly, you know, if you don't have two, it's easy to get people to buy the 16. If this phone has 2 cameras, who's buying the 16? It's very easy to understand. In the future, we're probably going to see 2 cameras on the next E version, and we're going to see 3 cameras on the next base model, and you're going to see 4 cameras on the next Pro models in the future. That's what I see coming down the line. Anyway, if you guys found this video helpful, entertaining, informing, let me know down below. I would conclude by saying the 16E is definitely living up to the A18 hype, the speed of the 16 series. However, you know, it also feels very light by comparison. It also feels old on the front. It has like a mixture of like old and new in one. So not my favorite, but still a solid option for those of you who don't care about the latest and greatest tech specs. Thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Stay tuned, and I'll catch you all in the next speed test, comparison, review, whatever it is. Have a great weekend. Nick here. Be sure to be well, and peace.